This episode is brought to you by United Airlines. When you want to make the most of your vacation, book with United. They're an airline that cares about your travels as much as you do. United is transforming the flying experience with Bluetooth connectivity, screens, power at every seat, and bigger overhead bins to help fit everyone's bag. And with their app, you can skip the bag check line, get live updates, and more. Change the way you fly. Book your next trip today at united.com.
Want to shop Walmart Black Friday deals first? Walmart Plus members get early access to our hottest deals. Join now and get 50% off a one-year annual membership. Shop Black Friday deals first with Walmart Plus. See terms at walmartplus.com.
Okay, we are back. Cindy is back for my uncle's escaped Alcatraz. She's been, on a hiatus because she was working so hard on another show. But Ken and Mike, sorry, and for our listeners, thank you for being patient with us last week. We had switched over to another podcast network, and now we're on Ad Large, which it doesn't really affect you guys, but it affects us. So the transfer got a little wonky at the end of last week. So we appreciate your patience, and we're back and full steam ahead on my uncle's escaped Alcatraz. So today we're going to kind of be all over the place, but we wanted to start off with Ken wants to tell us a little bit about some information that we haven't heard before about Fred Brizzi. And Fred Brizzi, if everybody's been listening, I think everybody understands who he is. He was the childhood friend of the Anglin brothers, who eventually became a pilot and introduced him to Mickey Cohen, and then brought them, spoke to the family in 1992 to tell them where they were. And so there's a lot. He's a pivotal character in this whole story of escaping Alcatraz. So Ken, set this thing up for us.
Okay. A lot of people, when they've heard of Fred Brizzi and they've heard the story that he's told the family, a lot of people think that was the first time that he ever met John and Clarence, which was down in Brazil in 1975. When he was with the Anglin family, and he actually met the Anglin family twice in 1992. The first one was never recorded. The second one was recorded by my mom. But he talked about that he was still in touch with them even in 1992. He was communicating still with them. So, it wasn't like the story that he kind of tells, and he told Inside Edition, I was just happened to be in Brazil and in Rio de Janeiro, and I went into a bar, and there was John and Clarence, and I ran into them, by accident. It wasn't like this one-off thing. But as I dug into Fred Brizzi's life, when I started doing some research on him, I came across an affidavit that it was a phone tap that had been done on a group of individuals in the Clearwater area that was where Fred lived. And the case was was going before a judge because it was actually going to be thrown out the way that they did the wiretap. But what they did was they identified, and it's a pretty lengthy document that I have, but they described this group of people that were running this drug business. Fred Brizzi is mentioned in it multiple times about going down to Colombia in South America, where he was picking the drugs up. They talked about the large number of planes that he was operating and the number of people he was operating with. The strange thing is they even have the person's name in Colombia that he was contacting and the phone number. What really struck me, though, in this affidavit was the lady who kind of ran the operation. Her name was Vicki Lyons. And
Vicky, what? What's the last name again?
Vicky Lyons.
Lions, like Lyons.
Yep. Well, I never really kind of thought about that. And I told Mike when we were doing the research until I went back and one time was doing research on Frank Morris. Well, Frank Morris used to go by Frank Lyons. And that
was one of his aliases.
Was that Fred Brizzi said that the man down in Brazil with John and Clarence had an American woman with him, and she was blonde. Now, I've tried to track down Vicky Lyons. I even have her in this affidavit. I had her address that she lived at, her phone number, and also it indicated that she had been arrested before. So she has a record. So I was planning on sharing this with the U.S. Marshal when he comes to see me, because if this person is related somehow to this story, this might be a way of us going down into Colombia, because Fred Brizzi used to go to Colombia all the time. That was where he went to pick drugs up. So it's not that far from that place in Colombia where they were going to easily go into Brazil. So was this a place, when I first read it, I often thought about, maybe I'm looking in the wrong place. Maybe it wasn't Brazil that he met them. Maybe they were in Colombia. But I was never able to find a farm that matched up to the photos that he gave us with those anthills. So the only ones I've ever been able to find was in Brazil. And we found a lot of, information with the Chevy plant and other pieces of information that we were able to take from that meeting and pinpoint the place in Brazil. But I still believe that there is a connection somehow with this person they were using in Colombia. And I even personally know, and I was going to share this with the U.S. Marshal also, I was in contact. He quit contacting me. I was in contact with one of the individuals, he's still alive today, who flew with Fred Brizzi down to Colombia multiple times. He went as a bodyguard. He was a karate expert. And they used to take these, he told me this, he said, him and another individual that was a karate expert, these people like Fred Brizzi and drug runners, they would take these karate experts with them for protection in case they got into trouble with local people. But he told me many times he knew exactly where Fred went. He went with him multiple times. He even told me he could show me and the God. He's a godfather, godparent to some children down there. But he quit communicating with me. But he still lives in the Ruskin area. I have his name. So we can definitely track him down and see if we could I really kind of think he wanted to leave that past. Sure. Because I asked him one time, did his family know what he used to do? Because he went to prison with Fred Brizzi when they got caught in 76.
Got it.
And he said, I try not to kind of let my employer know what I had done in the past. So I'm not sure if if we could force him into it. But at one time, he was interested in doing it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think it's unheard of to think that, your uncles could have ping-ponged between Brazil and Colombia.
No,
I mean, because the thing that was really interesting, because I was reading over the transcripts of the 1992 tape, and I only got through half of it. I mean, it's very compelling. And one of the things that Fred was talking about in those transcripts was the fact that at that time period, where they were, it was like the Wild West. There was like no borders. There was no kind of established towns or municipalities. It was like people, it's like, the people went and they lived there. They carved out. If they sat on the one thing you were telling me before, they would sit on a piece of land for a year. They paid $27 for it. It could be like 100 acres. Right. And they just sit on it for a year. And then after the year, they go there's a townsperson who acts as some sort of government official, but it's very loose, and said, all right, well, then that's your land. So it was like, and then the other thing I thought it was interesting is you were saying that, when he was down there is like, they would ask you, I go, do you have a gun? Do you have ammunition? Do you have food? Do you have a knife? Do you have ways to survive? Because he goes, you're going out there. He goes, anything can happen. We can't protect you. So
and they had to get a driver's license. That's another thing that we can use to track if he was truly there.
Yeah.
Well, he had to get a temporary driver's license.
And also building on that idea, when we went to Montero Lobato, which we've mentioned several times, when it was discovered that the three were hiding in the mountain above the town, they contacted their local sheriff, and he went up there to investigate. And eventually they made an arrangement where the brothers and Frank Morris paid him to go up to the mountain a couple of times a week to give him provisions just to keep him going. They were there for several months. Well, the person that was the sheriff was not really a sheriff. He was just sort of somebody that the town just sort of decided, like, you're going to be kind of our protector. You know, you're going to be kind of the local lawman here. And he agreed to it, and they paid him to do that. And it was just sort of this arrangement they made with the town.
Yeah, it's like High Plains Drifter. You know, it's like, you know, going into town, whoever had the will and the capability to protect people and is willing to do that, that's who that became the protector. It's like, and that was the one thing that really kind of came through with those transcripts, is that it was like the perfect place to go hiding because no one would come find you. And, you know, and based upon, you know, the people that we have working down there, it's a hike. It's a hike.
And imagine, like, there was no social media back then. I mean, even now it's limited. Like the internet's spotty. It's still very rural and rough. It's
very rural.
You know, it's not like being in the rural parts of the United States or even Europe or something. It's third world country.
I don't know if you can pick up on it from reading the transcripts, but if you listen to the tape, one of the things that really stood out to me as I've listened to it multiple times is Uncle Man. If you listen to Uncle Man as Fred Brizzi starts to tell the story of like the towns, and the Uncle Man would finish the story for him. Like he would start off talking about, you know, there's no law, and then Uncle Man would chime in before he even finished and say, yeah, there's no law in between these towns. I mean, you know, once you leave the city, you're pretty much out on your own. I'm like going, how does he know this? You know, how is he finishing the story before Fred Brizzi even completes it? And, you know, of course, we know now it was because he's been down there multiple times.
Yeah. Does there any, I mean, that was the other thing that we found out is back then, there was no record of any border crossings. They didn't keep any record.
But you got to remember, there was no border crossing every time Fred flew into Colombia either.
No, I know, but at
night.
Yeah. But I'm just saying, as far as if you physically went in there's no documentation, because I guess it didn't start until 1980.
Right.
You know,
well,
but like
I don't believe Fred went in on a commercial airline either.
No, I agree.
He didn't fly in on a commercial airline. He flew his own plane down there.
I agree, but I'm saying, as far as, so do you believe that when your Uncle Robert, went there, he flew with Fred?
Oh yeah, most definitely.
Okay, so he's under the radar. So he wouldn't need a passport. He wouldn't need any of that stuff.
No. Well, I mean, you know, even in that little town where that farm is that we're talking about, whenever I was doing Google map searches, I saw all kind of little private airstrips, you know, made out of grass that people have been using to land planes in. I mean, oh my gosh, you could easily land a plane in there and no one even know you were there.
At the bottom of the mountain, because Montero Lobato, Montero means mountain in Portuguese. I forgot what Lobato meant. It means something, but you have to go down. It's about, I think it was what 15 miles or something down the mountain to go to the valley. And there's this huge river, the Paraba del Sol River, and it goes for miles and miles and miles. Big river.
Is that the one in the photograph?
Yeah, you can't miss it. It's huge. It just snakes all through the valley. It goes many.
It goes right through their farm, which Fred said there was a river that went through their farm.
Well, the valley is very, very wide. It's flat and wide, and so there are many large farms down there. And of course, you have this massive river that is feeding all the farms and the livestock, animals, the orchards, and so forth. There's plenty of water for that area because it's a jungle area. It's very lush, and so there's a lot of rain. And so there are many places that Fred Brizzi could have flown and landed near the town. Wouldn't have been a problem at all.
Right.
Yeah.
When Fred told your family this, Ken, I mean, I think it's just, to me, it's like, why would he lie about it?
Well, and if you go back when I interviewed my mom on Thursday, I'm going to get into some of the subject with her.
Yeah.
That
Wait a minute. Are you gonna record that interview?
Oh yes, I'm gonna do it on my GoPro. I have a GoPro 8, and I'm going to set it up, and I'm gonna do a complete, probably maybe about an hour or 2 hour interview with her, and then
Okay.
next month I'm going to travel down to Ruskin to my Aunt Merle, who is the other sister who's still alive, and I'm going to, I got to think I really need to interview both of them before they pass away and
Absolutely.
get this story on tape. Anything that they can share, their memories, Fred Brizzi, the brothers, their family, anything that they might, all of a sudden kind of, I'm just going to drill into slowly the whole story with them. And I'm going to see what comes out of it.
Perfect.
But,
That's awesome.
when you go back to like Fred Brizzi, you have to really kind of, if you knew my Uncle Man, like I said, he became the patriarch of the family, definitely after my grandfather passed away. And he was very protective. In fact, when they did the book with Don Denevi, Don approached another family member, and nobody would talk to him until they went to Uncle Man and said, "Hey," he said, "Okay, we do this," and he gave his blessings, and that's when they all got together and decided to do a book. But there is no way that he would have ever allowed anyone to come and sit down with his brothers and sisters if he did not, first of all, want them to, and that he knew them. Fred, you got to remember, Fred Brizzi said he grew up with the brothers. So if he grew up with the brothers, he knew Uncle Man.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like this was someone who just walked up to my uncle and said, "Hey, I want to tell you the story, and can you bring me to meet your brothers and sisters?" I mean, no, this was something that was planned out, I guarantee you, by Uncle Man. He wanted his brothers and sisters to know in a way that their brothers were alive. They didn't die in that bay. It was a way of letting them know without actually kind of getting them in trouble.
Yeah.
The family was fearful. Even to this day, they're fearful. Even the two, the only two living siblings, that if they knew something, the FBI or the federal marshals, they threatened them so much they would come pick them up.
Yeah. 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 I mean, that's what I find. It's very interesting because it's like he is, and I've explained that to the other, former marshal we spoke to actually just past Friday. I said, you have to understand, I mean, this guy Fred Brizzi wasn't like some associate they met and they grew that introduced them to Mickey Cohen, just like that. They were childhood friends.
Yes.
So it's like they knew each other ever since they were, probably early high school or grade school or whatever. They grew up in the same area. So that connection is huge. And,
Well, and like one thing I found on Fred Brizzi, and I've shared all of this with Mike. He knows what I'm talking about, but I happened to write because when I found out that Fred was, spent time in a state prison in Florida, for some reason I wrote the Florida parole board, and they sent me Fred's complete parole record, which was amazing. His whole complete prison record. And so as I'm reading down through this, I see letters that Judy Brizzi, his ex-wife now, had written, and I think his sister had wrote, and trying to, give some credibility for him to get out on parole. And anyway, all the way to the very end, he's already paroled, or he's out, and he's wanting to take a trip with his wife, Judy. They wanted to go across the country to the state fair, which I believe it was in Washington at that time. And so he had to tell them, he had to get permission. And he said, "This is where we're going to go." This was in the fall of 1986. And in the document, he said, "We're going to go," he listed out the different places. And one of the places he was going to go was Yellowstone National Park. And he was there in September of 1986. Judy sent me pictures of the little trailer, that the pop-up trailer that they were pulling. It shows Fred sitting at a picnic table. It also shows him at one of the geysers. Well, just so happens Uncle Man is at that same geyser at that same time frame in September of 1986, and I have a photo of it.
So he was vacationing with him.
The exact same place that Fred Brizzi was at in 1986, which is now, as soon as Uncle Man leaves the Yellowstone in 1986, he travels and moves back to Florida to take care of my grandfather, who passes away in 1989, just, with cancer. But it's so strange that him and Fred Brizzi, who supposedly don't know each other now, right? We're in the same location in 1986 at the same geyser in Yellowstone National Park. And then all of a sudden, Uncle Man goes back to take care of my grandfather. And we all believe, we don't have any proof of it, but we all believe that he brought the brothers to see their dad before he passed away.
Really?
And so it would have made sense with Fred Brizzi being involved in this. He could have easily flown them in and out of the country. No one would have ever been the wiser, because when my grandfather died, I don't know why in the world, I was at the funeral. I was staying with my Aunt Merle, me and my wife, and we got up that morning to go to the funeral home where they were going to have the service. And it hit me right then. I said, "Oh my gosh!" It was like 12. I said, "We should have had someone staked out at the funeral home." And lo and behold, there was a funeral person who said there were two men who came in before anybody ever got there, dressed in long coats, had beards. They went down to the casket. It was an open casket. They wept and they left, and they were not there for the service.
Wow. And that was in 1989?
That was in 1989.
Wow.
And I told my mom, I said, why in the world did we not think about having someone, a family member there staked out? And it's just never occurred to us. So.
Wow.
Anyway, strange. So another strange tale we can tell.
Yes. Yes. How much, since you got to see all his Florida prison records, I mean, how much time did he spend in prison, Fred Brizzi?
He went to prison in 1976, and he got out in 1986. So 10 years. Now, this individual that I was telling you that flew with him, that his name is Richard. I won't say his last name just in case someone happens to watch it.
Yeah.
But Richard went to prison because he turned Richard in to get Judy off. Judy was going to prison also. And
Judy, his wife?
Yes. And I mean, I have a newspaper clipping of it. And Fred agreed to turn another one of his associates in if they would drop charges against his wife. And he turned in Richard. Richard told me about it. And Richard wound up spending time in prison because of. But he said he understood. He said he would have done the same thing if it had been his wife. He would turn someone in. So he didn't sound like he took it too hard. Fred basically sold him out to save his wife. Yeah.
And then I can't remember, where was he living when Art picked him up after the America's Most Wanted thing?
So he was. It was Clearwater. He was in that Clearwater.
Okay.
That's where he lived for the longest time. Clearwater, St. Pete area. I mean, he had a house over there at one time when he was married, and he had millions of dollars from drug running.
Got it.
But I'm going to tell you, there is a story, with Fred Brizzi, and this affidavit that I have with this wiretap. It wasn't just Fred Brizzi. There was a large group of people, and he was not flying into Colombia and picking up a pound of pot or 2 pounds. I mean, when he got caught in his airplane, he had 600 pounds of marijuana, all these quaaludes and all these other, drugs. One of the other guys that got caught, I've got a newspaper article that worked with Fred that had an even larger plane, had over 2,000 pounds of marijuana when he wrecked his plane and he got caught. But this was a large organization. This was not something that people think, oh, he was just a drug runner and he was going down and getting a couple of pounds of marijuana and bringing it back into the country. No, this was a large organization. Wow. It was being run by somebody. And so that's what me and Mike have always felt like, that somebody took it over for Mickey Cohen when he got injured.
Oh, and sure. I'm sure.
I always believed that it was Whitey Bulger who took
Oh, really?
it over. Yes. And the reason I say that is because why would Whitey Bulger go down into Mexico in the 70s? And I have a photo of him, deep into Mexico. He was traveling down there and meeting somebody. He never said who it was.
Well, and even in the FBI report, it does talk about when he was under surveillance, that he would go down to Mexico and spend time down there from time to time. That was sort of his quote unquote vacation spot. So yeah, so that was a place that he went to regularly.
I mean, what was a Boston mobster going down into deep Mexico if it wasn't for drug related stuff,
right? I mean, there's no, especially in that time period. Like, why would you be going there?
Well, that was one of the things that we spoke to with the former U.S. Marshal on Friday when we were actually talking about Whitey, because we were telling him about, he was shocked that you had correspondence with him, that you corresponded with him for, a period of time. You had 17, letters going back and forth with him. He's like, what? And he was also, because he was telling us a little bit about, because his friend was one of the ones who actually on the Marshals who found Whitey. And he was like, he said it wasn't hard. He goes, the FBI just wasn't looking for him. Right. They just, because it was, and for people who don't know, I mean, Whitey was living in Santa Monica in a very heavily populated area. And, he didn't hide. He was living like a couple blocks from the beach.
Well, and he had Alcatraz like twice. He went up to San Francisco and went out to the island multiple times.
Yeah.
I mean, well, and also he talks about in the letters when he would go to Vegas from time to time. They knew who he was. He wasn't hiding his identity. He would just like, oh yeah, we got a room ready for you. We're all set to go. And he'd gamble and spend time with people. He was sort of a celebrity. Well, he was a celebrity. They knew who he was, and they're rubbing shoulders with them, and he would always have a great time there. Yeah,
like I said before, I mean, I had the experience of working, doing a documentary kind of show with some of his underlings, Pat Nee, and Kevin Weeks wasn't a part of it, but I used to run into Kevin Weeks all the time in Southie, and Kevin Weeks was his one of his button men. And these guys just, they're out in the open.
Yeah.
They don't really, hide it. And it's almost like they wear it as a badge of honor. And it's like, I don't understand how that, I mean, especially in the Southie, I mean, he was the king of Southie back then. Right. He couldn't do, he took care of the neighborhood, but he also, he had his brother was a state legislator too. So, and then they talk about the FBI agent that he was in cahoots with. So it's all very kind of crazy when you think about it. And you can't really, when you think about the escape from Alcatraz and you think about how Whitey was involved, I mean, I don't know whether or not he had FBI contacts then while he was in Alcatraz.
Or whether he became the kind of the kingpin he became later. He was sent to Alcatraz, ultimately sent to Alcatraz for robbing several banks.
Yeah.
That's what got him there eventually. Because he went to Atlanta, and then he tried to escape from Atlanta and then was sent to Alcatraz. So the kind of the mob aspect of his life really hadn't started yet. It was after he got out.
Yeah, after he got out, he became the leader of the. But for some reason, the Winter Hill Gang. But for some reason, he still had a lot of pull though when he was in prison. And the reason I say that is because, the story that we shared that he told us about him saving Mickey Cohen in prison. I mean, when they were in Leavenworth, they had left Alcatraz and were on the way back to Atlanta, and he's out in the yard lifting weights, and this individual is on his way to stab Mickey Cohen, Well, they tell Whitey about it. Why would you tell Whitey about it? And what did he have to do with this? You would think of him as just being an ordinary prisoner at that time, right? No, somebody tells him, hey, somebody's going after Mickey, and he tracks the guy down and tells him, he says, for every time you stab Mickey, I will stab you 4 times. He pretty much put him in his place, and that was the end of that. But he carried a lot of authority somehow, even at that young age.
When you found all this information, like his prison information, the wiretap with Fred Brizzi and stuff like that, have you shared when you did the couple documentaries with, that Art, one of them Art was involved in? Did you guys talk about that, or did you have that information at that time?
When I did the documentary with Art in 2015, I didn't have any of this.
Yeah, that's what I figured.
I didn't really start digging into it until 2016 when, we thought that, I'll be honest with you, we really thought the History Channel was going to do a series. In fact, that's really what they told us. They originally came in and said, hey, we want to do a series with you. We're going to do multiple episodes. I wanted to tell the story that we told in this book.
Mm-hmm.
And I had pieces of it at that time, not as much as I will eventually have. But so they were like, okay, we'll do this, but let's do this 2-hour documentary. Okay, let's do this. And so they said, as soon as the documentary is over with, we're going to green light and we're going to go into multiple seasons. Well, then they came back and said, well, if the show gets 1 million views, the night that it airs, we're going to green light it. And so we get 2 million views. And then they came in and said, well, we want you to give us some other information. And at that point, I just said, you know what? We're not giving you anything else. You're not going to green light it, then we're not going to do anything. And they walked away. And, what I understand later on, though, that everyone at History Channel wanted to do it.
Mm-hmm.
It was the CEO who was there. They said the guy we was working with said the CEO walked in the room and everybody thought, okay, we're fixing to do this. And he goes, I decided I don't want to do it, and walked away. And
that happens so much.
What? Like, why are we not doing this? It was a hit.
Yeah.
And so anyway, that was the end of that. So
yeah.
I pretty much went on to my own, and that's when I started digging into the information. And I even wrote the state of Alabama to get information on Alfred and John Clarence. Do you know that the state of Alabama doesn't even have anything on John and Clarence? In fact, they even told me, I said, well, if they came back today, would you not arrest him? And she said, no, because we don't have anything on them.
Yeah, the record.
No records whatsoever.
Yeah.
There's nothing. There's no records on Alfred. There's no record on any of them. And in fact, they said we could not hold them because we don't even have a case against them.
Wow.
I was like, so I probably have more than they have.
You probably do.
To the actual case.
It's bizarre.
It is very strange. Very strange.
It's crazy.
I've tried to write the Atlanta penitentiary, the federal prisons in Atlanta, to get any information I can on Alfred, and they destroyed every bit of it.
That's what makes no sense to me at all. Why? Why would they do that if there wasn't something to hide?
Well, I've got documents. I've got documents, and Mike's seen them, where Alfred tried to get the information from the state trial so that he could give to the ACLU so that he could try to overturn this case, and they refused to give it to him, and they destroyed it. They gave an order to the U.S. Marshal to destroy all evidence of the case. I've got the letter where they said they did it.
Destroy all the evidence.
They destroyed every single thing in the state trial. The only thing that we have is what we were able to get a hold of prior to them destroying it.
Wow. Was it just part of their purge, or do you think there's something more nefarious?
Well, okay, I can understand maybe 50 years later, 40 years later, let's get, clean up a bunch of it. This was within a year, because Alfred was trying to get the information from the trial to give to the ACLU, because they wanted to see the transcript of the trial, and they destroyed it rather than giving it to him. So he was never able to give it to the ACLU.
That's when everything was paper. You could get rid of it very quickly.
Yeah, sure could.
There was no digital footprint.
Yeah. Anyway, you know, like I said, the Fred Brizzi angle. Oh my gosh, there is way more there than people have had a chance to really kind of see. And what is amazing, and I've asked my mom this, and I'm more during the interview, I'm going to see if I can pry it out of her a little bit more.
Yeah.
Like I said, there was another meeting with Fred Brizzi. They actually met with him. That recording was done in December of 92, and they met with him the first time in October of 92. And in the recording, you can hear them asking him about the questions that he sent down to the brothers. So in the first meeting, he had each one of them ask questions, and he recorded it on a recorder. And then he said the way that he communicated with them, and he tells us in the tape, is that he would record it and send it down. A person would come by and pick it up, and it probably would get re-recorded another time before it actually made it down there. And then if they chose to answer, they would send another tape back, and it would eventually end up to him. And that's
wow. So there potentially could be a tape floating around with their answers.
I have asked my mom. She said, you know, I remember us asking questions. You know, she's 89, so
yeah.
She was like, I don't ever remember us getting anything back. So
got it.
But it's just the fact that he was still in communications with them in 92.
Yeah.
This wasn't like, oh yeah, I went to this farm, but I didn't know how to get back there. You know, I couldn't show you. In fact, you know how he told the U.S. Marshal, he said, when I got caught, you know, they asked me about it, and I said, well, I can't tell you how to get there. I can't show you on a map, but if I was there, I could drive there. I mean,
yeah.
But yet he's still in communications with them with tape. So
sure,
you know, he was definitely leading the Marshals.
Well, I'm sure it was probably easier to find it flying in as opposed to driving in. I mean, you know,
Art, you know, I know hopefully he listens to this, but Art's been involved in a lot of the story of this Alcatraz. You know, He was involved with the guy who was writing the book with the family that we didn't know about. He was the one that we believe now. I don't know. Uncle Man never said who the U.S. Marshal was who came and picked him up in the 2000s to do a polygraph. But Art was working the case during that time. So I can't imagine any other U.S. Marshal that would have come picked Uncle Man up and gave him a polygraph, but yet never told him the results of it. So Art undoubtedly knows what, you know, if he was lying, because Uncle Man, we asked him, you know, years later when he was telling us about it. And someone said, well, did you pass? And he said, well, they never told me. And then he kind of joked and he goes, I don't know how I passed it. So he knew they probably asked him some very point blank questions, and he knew he failed it, but they never told him what the results were. So Art has this information, but he's not.
So he has the results of the polygraph.
Of course he does. Of course he does. You know, he's the one who picks Fred Brizzi up and questions him. You know, you as well as I know heard Ed Shea, what was his name? Frank
Ahern.
Ahern say that to everybody that was on this podcast that he was working with Art Roderick and that they went down to Brazil. So there you go. You know, but you asked Art today and he will deny that any of that ever happened.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm curious to when our friend comes and visits you in a couple weeks.
I'm gonna share all this with him.
Good. Yep. Good. I mean, you know, and then to me, for the life of me at this point, why you just can't unearth all this information and just kind of break the silence. You know, I mean, it's like, you know, and now that Trump is in the White House, he had promised RFK Jr. that he's going to unseal this time, like he promised the last time, but he promised him this time because he's going to be part of his cabinet that he's going to unseal these JFK documents about both his uncle and his father's death.
I would love to see it fully opened along with the Alcatraz file.
Yeah.
I don't know why they still to this day have, a large part of it redacted. And clearly this must not be, those 17 volumes cannot be everything. And the reason I say that is because I'll transition now into that topic that I've always wanted to talk about so think about this. Of the items that they found after the escape, whether it be on top of the cell house, especially on the cell house, or out in the bay, none of those items could actually be positively linked to those three men. If you think about it, the paddle, it doesn't have anybody's name on it. They couldn't tell you who it actually belonged to.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they found another paddle on Alcatraz, so it's assumed that this was the paddle that they used. Same thing with the life vest. There's no name on the life vest. They don't know who that belonged to. But they found one, on Alcatraz, so they assume this is the one that they used. There's only one piece of item, one evidence that they found that directly ties to the three men, and that was the pouch. That pouch, because it had letters in it, it had photographs in it, it had pieces of paper in it that had their names on it. That is the only thing that truly links them in that water. And you would think, okay, this is got to be the biggest piece of evidence, right? There is no photograph of it in any of the 17 volumes that we have. Now, they photograph everything else. They photograph all the paddle and the life preserver and the raft and all the periscope tools that they use. You will not find a photograph of that pouch, nor any of the contents in that FBI box. Now, you tell me why that is.
I don't know. We should ask Amanda. We should ask Amanda.
It ties to them.
Well, they do list everything that's in the pouch,
but there's no photographs of it.
No, there's no photographs, but they do list what the item was and a description of it. I think there's like 70 or 80 items that they list in the FBI report. Quite clearly what they're showing of what they found in the pouch.
Mm-hmm.
But like Ken said, if there's a photograph or photographs, so there'd have to be more than one. There'd have to be many photographs.
Right. The very first document that is listed in volume 1, and I'm reading it here, says, in addition, these boats recovered from the water what has been described to Mr. Price as a waterproof pouch containing several letters, some of which mention the names of Anglin and Frank Morris. And then there are other documents that list out, not only were there letters, but there were pieces of paper with people's addresses, okay, that the FBI thought they were going to go contact. And then, of course, all of the photos. But then I started kind of thinking, okay, I can understand the letters, because those are letters that would have belonged to John and Clarence, and the photos. But explain to me how they have, and I read in the FBI files where they took those pieces of paper with all these addresses and locations and went and visited these people. And these people would say in the files, I don't know anybody at Alcatraz. I have no knowledge John and Clarence Anglin and Frank Morris. Tell me how they got these addresses. There's no phone books in Alcatraz. These prisoners didn't have access to a phone book.
So what do you think? What do you think those addresses were? The names and addresses, or were they just
names and addresses of people that the FBI thought they were carrying to contact when they got on the outside? But my question is, how did they get all these addresses? Because one, these people didn't know anybody at Alcatraz. They had no knowledge of not only the three men, but they didn't know anybody at Alcatraz. They had no knowledge of who these people were. But yet John and Clarence and them in their pouch had their names and addresses. So where did they get the names and addresses from?
Exactly.
Did they carry like a universal, a phone book in Alcatraz that they
Well, I mean,
let
you
me
did
get
have
this
some. You
address in
did.
California or Chicago or something like that.
Where were all at? Were they all over the place?
They were all over the place.
That's no way.
Well, you had Mickey Cohen. He left the island.
Yeah, but how do you get these names and addresses? Exact names and addresses. It's not like I can sit down and I write it, I'm going to escape, so I'm going to throw the guards off, so I'm writing down these addresses and I'm guessing, okay, I don't know your address, Rob, but I could probably try to guess and, Cherry Street, Los Angeles. Would that be right? Would I be able to guess the actual address for the FBI to go track it down if you did not have a phone book? How did they do that?
And a lot of they've been in the phone book?
There's no phone book at Alcatraz that these prisoners would have had access.
Right.
Now, of course, the logical conclusion is, when after the escape had happened, the FBI took over the escape, the aftermath of the escape, and they interviewed all the inmates, and all the inmates to a person said, "Boy, I didn't know anything about it until this morning when it happened. That's the first time I ever heard about it." And of course, that's not the truth. They're all lying.
Yeah.
And so it's very possible that these people somehow had a connection to the brothers, probably more indirectly. It's, it could be through Cohen or somebody else, or maybe, your Uncle Man knew these people and sort of prearranged, like, hey, they might show up at your door one day. And of course, when the FBI shows up, it's like, I don't know who they were. I'm mystified.
Sure.
It's very easy for them to lie about it.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting when you read the FBI files, because there is a section in there where they go and interview every one of these people that are listed. Because there was a long list of names and addresses. It's almost kind of like, why would you carry all these names and addresses? And so they're out there looking at, and the reason I say that is because there's another FBI file that I ran across, which was really interesting. The FBI was stunned. Yeah, I never really kind of went back and read some of the notes that the FBI wrote at the bottom of these FBI files. You got to remember, when they were writing these files, they were not sharing it with like William Bennett, who is the prison, the director of federal prison. These people didn't see these files. And so at the very bottom, this is interesting. So they were talking about the pouch again. They said, article in the San Francisco Chronicle this date reflects that James Bennett, director of the Federal Bureau of Prisons, had been contacted in Washington by a reporter and released information that 2 watertight plastic bags containing names and addresses of persons the subjects planned to contact had been found in the water near the Golden Gate Bridge and turned over to the FBI. Bennett further reported that the finding of these bags indicated that the subjects had undoubtedly drowned. Now, the FBI writes right beside there in their own little handwriting, how did Bennett learn about the address? Surely releasing this information was this information jeopardized the case for us to be able to find out if they were going to contact these people. My question is, how did Bennett know about the contents of the pouch? Because it was never released to the public. He told a reporter what was inside of that pouch. How did he know that? And the FBI even wrote down in there, whoever was doing this document said they were mystified as how he knew what was in it.
Well, could one of his guards who was searching after the escape found it?
Well, no. So the Army is the one who found the pouch. If you go back and look at the very first document, they find the pouch and they turned it directly over to the FBI. My question is, how did he know? We go back to that photo of the cell. All these letters that was in this pouch was also in John's cell the next morning. John didn't take these letters. Go back, pull up the photo of John's cell the very next morning. All of those letters that were in that pouch are sitting in John's cell the next morning. So how did John take that pouch and all those letters with him? And And the pouch that they were in is sitting on top of the letters in John's cell. Now, explain to me how that pouch
ended up in the water.
All those letters wind up in the water, along with addresses that John and Clarence would never have access to. Wind up in the water. How does that happen? And how does William Bennett, who is the director of the prisons, know what the contents were when the FBI had never revealed it to anyone?
What do you think, Mike? Something smells.
Well, Ken's theory is that the finding of the pouch was a staged event.
Yes.
That it's like a plant, basically.
Right.
And because one of the things that has been brought up was the conclusion, then Ken just read it, the conclusion that Bennett makes based on the finding of the pouch is, well, they must have drowned, because this is obviously very important to them. These are their prized possessions. And they would not have been so careless as to let them fall into the water unless there was a catastrophic event, the raft sinking or breaking up in the middle of the bay, and they lost everything. You have the paddle and the life vest, which were found later as evidence of they didn't make it, and this is just floating debris. And they concluded that the pouch, being the most important of all the items, was also floating debris. So they must have drowned. That's the story that has kind of stuck since then. However, and we pointed this out when we talk about the raft, was in the FBI report, it goes to great lengths to say that they went to Angel Island to look for the raft, and there was no evidence of the raft being there. They sent National Guard troops there, soldiers there, and there's a photograph of them looking around on the island, and it's a photograph that is, we wanted to put it in the book, but unfortunately we couldn't get the rights to it, so we can only talk about the event. But so there was media there as well taking pictures, because you can see the like when media kind of crops a photo, it has like the grease marks around the edge of the photo.
Yeah,
they know how to zoom in. It has those kinds of marks. Well, that's a media mark that they do to crop a photo. So the media were with them, and the FBI report concludes there's zero evidence that the raft was ever there. And so they leave the island and continue the search elsewhere. Well, we found, and it's in the book, All Points Bulletin the next day that the raft had been found on Alcatraz, on Angel Island. And it was sent to a couple of places. We actually have two All Points bulletins, 2 APBs of the raft being found. And so, basically, keep your eyes open, because these guys are around here somewhere, because that's where the raft was discovered. And we also have a interview from Clifford Fish, who was one of the guards searching for, on the bay the day after the escape. And we talked about Olaf, the other guard, and he determines that based on the tides and the time that the raft would have most likely drifted towards Angel Island, which they were the ones that found it. And then they tie the raft to the boat and tow it back to Alcatraz. So the boat did not the raft did not disintegrate. It was still floating when they found it, and it was towed back. It wasn't placed on the boat. It was towed. And then the FBI and the guards, they went to the pier area of the island, and the guards were examining it and making note of what they found. And then so then he leaves and then comes back the next day, and he says the raft is gone, never to be seen again. No one ever talked about it again. So he says, I don't know what happened to the raft, but it just disappeared.
So what about that raft that's in that staged photo on the beach that's deflated?
That's a recreation.
Yeah, that's a recreation.
Yeah, that's not an actual photograph. And a lot of people mistakenly believe that it is, because the police officers and the investigator who's kind of kneeling down next to it are wearing period costumes to make it seem like it's an authentic photo. And people think here's a photograph, but it really isn't. So the idea that they drowned, that there was a catastrophic event, is not true. We have two completely independent sources saying the exact same thing, that the raft was found on Angel Island. And actually we have a third source, Whitey Bulger, when the letters that he wrote to Ken, says that the next day on the 12th, when it was discovered, when all the inmates found out about the escape, and it was, they had the alarms go off, everyone was in lockdown. And then the FBI, of course, investigated everyone. When they were finally before they were locked down, he said that it was common knowledge that the inmates knew that the raft had been found on Angel Island, that the guards were talking about it.
Sure, I'm sure they found out about it first.
Right, and the inmates overheard, and of course then they're all telling each other, hey, they found the raft on Angel Island. So he said it was very well known of what had happened. So 3 sources are saying the exact same thing that are not connected to each other. So that's really what happened, that the raft did not disintegrate. Therefore, the brothers did not drown because of that. So what happened?
So, if you're the director of the federal prisons and you don't want this story to go any further, and you want people to believe that they drowned. Mm-hmm. And so, it's pretty obvious that once they found the pouch, not only did William Bennett start coming out, say, the actual day, okay, this proves that there was something happened. Like Mike said, there was a malfunction. This information was important to them. So undoubtedly, this proves that they drowned. Then you've got Olin Blackwell starting to say the same thing. He's recorded a newspaper article. So they're painting this picture based upon this pouch, not based upon the paddle, not based upon the life vest. They're doing it based upon the pouch, that this proves that they drowned. Now, all of a sudden, you've got Officer Chechi coming out saying, "Whoa, wait a minute now, I saw a boat out there." Oh, no, you didn't. No, that goes against the narrative that we want to tell that they drowned. And of course, then that would also go against the narrative. Oh, what do you mean you found the boat? So there was no catastrophic event. The boat's still intact. They didn't want that in the story either. Their story is, which is something that art still carries on today, is that they drowned in that bay, even though there's no evidence whatsoever to back up that theory other than the pouch. Now, but I go back again. How is it that pouch and all of those letters are sitting in John's cell the very next morning?
Yep.
You cannot.
So I'm sure they photographed it. I'm sure they photographed the crime scene, and then after the fact, they scooped that stuff up, and then someone had the brilliant idea, said, "Listen, we can't let it get out that these guys made it. Let's stage something." It's not the first time it's been done.
Right, and I've also kind of pointed out to someone one time that the Army guy who finds the pouch says it was about 3 feet down in the water. They were dragging a net and it got caught in it. And when he opened it up, it was full of water. And the first thing that kind of hit me was, wait a minute. John and Clarence made life preservers that were waterproof, that held air for almost an hour. They made a raft that was still intact the next morning, but yet you mean to tell me that this important piece of information, he did a piss poor job at making a pouch that flooded.
Did they say what the location was? It like?
Why didn't he do a better job at it?
Exactly. Did they say the location of where it was located? Was it near the island, Alcatraz Island?
The FBI report does give the location. I don't remember exactly where it is.
I'd be curious if they went out and just like threw it in the water right at the edge and said, "Oh."
I want to say it was close to the island, but I could be confusing that with the other items.
It would have to be if they found it 3 feet in the water. I mean, that's got to be close to like a shoreline.
Okay, according to this, the operator of the debris, which are boats maneuvering the bay, Mr. Price had just advised that one of the boats had recovered a paddle in the water approximately 1 mile east of Alcatraz in the bay. Price does not have the description of the paddle yet. In addition, the boats also recovered the pouch. So they were 1 mile east of Alcatraz in the bay. So east would be heading toward the mainland. So it would be over in that mainland area. That would be east.
East would be kind of towards the Oakland side of the bay.
Exactly.
The Golden Gate Bridge is the western direction.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it would be over, but it wouldn't be toward Angel Island.
It would be behind the island from
Yep,
San Francisco.
behind it. If you're looking at it, yeah. Going towards Oakland, yeah.
Now, according to this document, it was dated June the 14th. So that would have been the escape was the 11th,
12th.
and yeah,
12th.
So that would have been 3 days later. Yeah, 3 days later.
Plenty of time to plant something.
But now my
it's
argument
all very
with
suspicious,
Art
Ken.
is these letters, including the one that my grandmother wrote Clarence on June the 11th, 1962. She mails it. It gets dated and sent out. That letter probably showed up days, a week later, and they still have that letter. These letters have nothing to do with the escape. I can prove it. It's in the cell the next morning. Why are you hanging on to these letters claiming they were part of the escape?
Yep.
That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it does not make any sense. And
it all doesn't make
sense. Those letters back.
Exactly. Let's get them back. Give them back. All right. Well, that's something you can ask our friend.
Oh, I will.
When he comes out and sees you. All right. All right, guys. Once again, riveting stuff. I'm even more compelled and confused sometimes with this story. But you guys got the receipts. You really do. Amazing work.
Absolutely.
All right, guys. Well, we'll see you next week.
How do you feel when you switch to Geico and save on your car insurance? It's like going to work on one Thursday morning and thinking to yourself, just one more day until Friday. But then somebody in the elevator says, Happy Friday! Then you check your phone quickly and discover today is actually Friday. So yes, Happy Friday, random stranger in the elevator. Happy Friday indeed. Yep, switching and saving with Geico feels just like that. Get more with Geico.